This is True North Story, the original podcast series. Learn, love, listen, live. Are you ready to discover your True North Story?
Hi, I'm Tiama Fulton. Welcome to True North Story, the series. My co-host is my childhood friend, John Hudson Messerall. John and I grew up in the same neighborhood in Chicago together. And as we grew up, we realized that we had a lot of things in common, including we both were on a journey to find our True North story. True North is your purpose in life. It's the thing that grounds you. It's the calling that you have. And your journey to True North is your True North story, things that guide you along the way. John and I have talked to some amazing people, and we want to share their True North stories with you because we all have True North stories to share.
So many amazing things. Professor, lecturer, writer, screenplay creator. How do you describe yourself? If someone asks you in a cocktail party, "Nice to meet you, Richard," what do you do?
Well, if in an elevator, if somebody asks me and I don't have much time to reply, I'm a writer. And the most important thing to me in my life, of course, is family. But professionally speaking, I would say I'm a writer. My position at the University of California assigns me top priority, not as a teacher, believe it or not, but as a writer, teaching at a research institution like the University of California is the second most important thing that we do. The first thing that we're required to do is to stay busy with what they call in the more traditional disciplines, the sciences and so on, research, and in the arts they call it creative activity. But that's and obviously in my field that would be writing. And that's what I'm required to do. Sometimes people ask me, does the university tolerate professors having outside careers? And I always say, no, they don't tolerate it. That is to say, they don't merely tolerate it, they actually require it. So first and foremost, right. I am a writer. What do I do beyond that? Yes, I am a teacher. I'm a writing educator, longtime tenured professor at the UCLA. Now in my 39th year. I'm going to give it 39 more years. If it still hasn't worked out for me, that's enough already. Beyond that, I am also a consultant. I give a lot of screenwriting notes to writers both in and out of the industry. I'm also a longtime court-authorized expert witness in intellectual property litigation, copyright infringement, plagiarism, who wrote the movie, stuff like that. And I don't mind telling you there's few experiences that mellow the spirit better than meeting with a bunch of lawyers and having them pay you money. It's much sweeter
That's good
dynamic.
Work if you can get it, right?
And beyond that, of course, I'm a family guy. I'm a new grandpa for the first time.
Congratulations. That's wonderful.
People ask, is it as good as they say? And I say, no, it's not as good as they say. It's even better. It's all of the fun and none of the cholesterol, if you follow what I'm saying.
Let me ask you, Richard, you say first and foremost a writer. When did you know? Was it something that you just knew in grade school and junior high and high school that you were always going to be a writer, or that you had talents and a passion for it?
When I look back at my college papers, I was a history major. By the way, I think history is a terrific major for a eventual screenwriter. History is high story, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's really just a story. When I look back at the research papers I wrote as a history major, as an undergraduate in college, I don't see very much promise there. It didn't come to me to be a writer until I was in my early 20s, and I had kind of on the spur of the moment, without much planning at all, suddenly decided to enroll in film school, not at UCLA, but across town at USC. And it was it was a very special time there. People refer to it as the Lucas era. I like to think that George calls it the Walter era.
Right.
But I doubt that that's the case. There was a legendary writing teacher there, Irwin R. Blacker, and it was in his class, which it happens to be a class that I've now replicated at UCLA. I've taught it over 100 times over the last 40 years, a screenwriting workshop, just a round table with about 8 or 10 or a dozen writers, each one writing a feature-length screenplay. And it was there in Blacker's class that it dawned on me that I could write something as long as a screenplay, and I hope not merely long, but also engaging and and provocative and having the traits and the qualities and the characteristics that I've been preaching in my books and lectures for years that screenplays ought to have. But that's where it really happened. There was one day when I was working on my script, a story set in Harlem in New York City, way back in the late 60s when I was at SC in Irvin R. Blacker's class, that it dawned on me, wow, I can do this. Here we are now, almost a half century later, no regrets. LA, I love New York. I was there, as I said just a few weeks ago. I'm there quite frequently. I have a lot of business there, have a lot of family there. Ain't nothing like the Apple. But LA is much more like New York than it is unlike New York. When you first come here, it seems so different. Certainly we have better weather.
Right.
But the truth is it's a very diverse community, a huge community, a gigantically, thunderingly creative community, much more like New York than not like New York. So, like I said before about grandchildren, it's, all of the fun and none of the cholesterol. Ditto for L.A.
What, as a writer over, 40-plus years, have you seen the business change from a writing and storytelling perspective? And if so, how?
Writing is storytelling. What has happened is, and it's very, very good news, is there is newfound respect for writing. The writers have come into control, and it's not as writers, but as producers. The writers, if you'll notice now, are also producing, and that is a function of TV. Television's often been, generally been that way for the most part, as opposed to theatrically distributed features. The difference today is when I came to town, there were 3 TV networks and 7 major movie studios. Now there are 7 major movie studios and, 250 TV networks.
Richard, your sister, Jessica Walter, is a noted actress, and she's been in movies and more recently in television. Is that right?
She just was on, a couple of weeks ago, she did a guest shot on NCIS. And the only thing that's unusual about that is that it's actually broadcast television over CBS. Everything else she's doing is she had a couple of series back-to-back on TV Land. She's in her 7th season on the Emmy-winning animated Archer. She is still on Netflix, which is streaming the last season that they did of Arrested Development, and they are going to do a new season. They're going to do a new new slate, I should say, of episodes for that. And the reason I mention it is, again, Netflix, TV Land, FX, they didn't even exist 20 minutes ago.
Right.
They're not only hiring more actors like my sister, but also more writers, directors, hairstylists, makeup and wardrobe artists, and so on. There's just never been a better time, a more exciting time.
You think that writing is as strong as it was when it was you and George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and the folks that we think of as icons and titans? Because you're seeing your students coming through your class. You're seeing as well as what you're writing yourself. But what's your thoughts on the overall strength of the quality of the craft?
Well, as I say, I believe this is the single greatest moment in the history of movies. You're talking to somebody who believes that The Sopranos, for example, is one of the greatest achievements in the history of dramatic narratives. My life was just turned upside down by Breaking Bad. At UCLA we have a word, the basic, the minimum requirement, not a word but a rule. It's 3 words. It's all we really require as a minimum. And here it is. Don't be boring. But the real lesson in it, and it's one that George Lucas, my old classmate, really established decades ago. There's a long-time running argument: who's really the power behind, the creative power, the authentic voice of a particular work of dramatic expression? Is it the director or is it the writer? We've always argued it's the writer. We think it's nonsense to suggest that it's anybody but the writer. The writer is the first artist, if for no other reason, because she's first. There's no need for a director, no need for actors and fancy equipment if it hasn't been written down, a good plan, which is, of course, the screenplay, by a writer. George comes along, and after the first Star Wars, or is it the 4th Star Wars, the crazy calculus of how those all line up. But the first one produced, the one that was released in '77, that was the last picture for for decades that George ever took a writing credit or a directing credit on. He left the Directors Guild, he left the Writers Guild simply to produce. So the writers, the directors were for hire working for him, and he really established what is the truth of the proposition, which is that who's the most powerful creative force in in filmed expression? Is it the writer or is it the director? The answer is it's neither of those. It's the producer.
You mentioned about the writers today moving more into a producer capacity, or people that get original concepts for television or film turned into projects that get green-lighted. What insights would you share with an aspiring screenwriter?
I'll tell them two things. And the first thing would be that everything has changed. And the second thing would be that nothing has changed. What has not changed is story. If you look back at the history of film, it's interesting. The very, very first filmed image is, guess what? It is a clip of a trolley car traveling down the main street in Orange, New Jersey. Why? This would be about 1880 or something like that, 1885. I already have tenure, so I don't have to know for sure the exact year, but sometime in the 1880s, I believe it was, Edison invented the kinetoscope, the movie projector, which was also the movie camera, which was also turned around, and the same device was used also to project the film. And guess where his offices were, where his studio was? It was in Orange, New Jersey. Once they invented the camera, they figured, let's try it out. They're not going to take it to Canton, Ohio. Let's use it where it is. So there's New Jersey. Why the trolley? Well, because it moves. You don't invent a movie camera and then try it out on a still life. You want something that moves. So you get that right outside that studio is the trolley car line, and so he took the camera out there and they shot the trolley. Now for the next, 10, 20 years or so, people were just blown away by, an image that moved. You can imagine sort of how exciting that must have been if you'd never seen it before. It would be as if you don't get very excited if somebody takes a Bic lighter out of his pocket and flips it and a flame appears. But can you imagine the excitement that would have occurred if you had done that like thousands of years ago in ancient civilizations? You could just pull something out of your pocket. So people were really blown away by images that moved. But in a hurry, they got weary of that. Then, and I think in the very early 1900s, 1903, 1905, comes the Great Train Robbery, the first story that is created for film, at least in this country. And since then, films have changed in 100,000 ways. They've gone from silent to sound, from short to long, from black and white to color, from all different kinds of format to IMAX and sharing files and streaming and cable and DVD. Writers today should be thinking about the same things that writers should have been thinking about and were thinking about, the good ones 100 years ago, which is what's the good story, what's the best story, how do I tell my story? And the format that it's in is really of secondary importance to that.
Richard, with all of the new technologies with CGI and green screen, has that changed storytelling at all for audiences in film?
The short answer is no. It's still all about telling stories. Now, to some extent, new technologies sometimes interfere for a little while. They become dominant. I think there's too much CGI. There are too many effects. Audiences, I think, get bored with anything that takes you away from the from the story. If you look back, for example, to the biggest change in film, I would say technologically, would have been in the late 20s when sound came in. And prior to sound, the writers understood when the dialogue had to be contained in cards that were photographed and flashed on the screen. Filmmakers knew, producers knew, writers knew that audiences didn't come to the movie theater to sit there and read projected dialogue, so it was kept to a minimum. When sound came in, suddenly everything was dialogue for 10 years. Also, the cameras were very, very noisy, and in order to baffle the sound that the cameras make while they're, so that actors could record dialogue that they're speaking. The cameras were put into gigantic boxes that they call in the industry blimps. They muffle the sound to make it possible to record the sound of the camera, and they make it possible to record the dialogue. So you had a cameraman in this very hot box, a very big box, with a very big camera in it, cranking and so on. You couldn't really move it very easily. You couldn't do cinematic crane shots and panning and tilting and things like that. So movies got very, very talky as a result of the technology. Now that CGI is available, there's just too much hijinks, too many effects. It's not in the context of a solid story.
So in essence, it takes away from the story.
It can, if it's not used wisely. Again, it's all about the writing. How effectively is it used? Is it used for its own sake? Then it's going to fall on its face. If it's used for the only sake that exists in dramatic narratives, and that is moving the story forward, then it's fine. It works just great.
This is True North Story, the original podcast series. And now, back to the program.
No, I consider myself to be the luckiest guy that ever drew breath. They say you can't have it all. I have the world's best job at UCLA, and of course, being a writer is, you're literally trafficking in your own imagination. You're swapping your daydreams for dollars. We get paid, writers do, if we get paid at all, for what other people get punished for and reprimanded for, which is daydreaming. So what's not to like?
Tam and I both are childhood friends and grew up together in Arlington Heights, Illinois, and we had the same first grade teacher who accused us both of daydreaming. So maybe that was a precursor to writing, and maybe that was a compliment.
I used to get reprimanded when I was in junior high school in Queens by Mr. Greenberg, who was the vice principal and the sort of disciplinarian, and he told me two things were going to hold me back. One was that on Fridays, which were assembly days, they called them, boys had to put on ties. And I always forgot to put the tie on, and I would make little air quotes if we were in the same room together, around the word forgot. That was my little mini rebellion. I refused to wear a tie. And also I was constantly wisecracking, mouthing off. And he told me, he took me to his office. He called me to the office and he told me I was never going to get anywhere in this world if I didn't learn how to stop wisecracking, and if I stopped resisting putting on a tie, that the day would come when I would have to put on a tie every day when I went to work. Well, years later, I was working on I had actually sold my first novel to a major New York publisher, and then the film rights had been picked up by Warner Brothers. So I left the studio and I was driving back to my house, and I started to laugh so hard that tears were running down my face. I had to actually pull over to the side of the road. I was afraid I crashed the car. And I was laughing about two things. They all had to do with Abraham Greenberg, the vice principal. The first one was that had I shown up at that office with a tie, they wouldn't have let me on the lot. They would have said, there's a guy here who says he's a writer, but he's wearing a tie. We think this is pretty suspicious. Security would have looked into that. They wouldn't have let me on the lot if I claimed to be a writer wearing a tie. So much for wearing ties. And as far as wisecracking is concerned, that was the express, explicit assignment by my employer, my producer, was to come up with wisecracks. So much for Abraham Greenberg. Here I was doing the two things that he told me would hold me back, wisecracking and refusing to wear a tie, and I was making the equivalent, adjusted for inflation today, of about $35,000 a week, working at Warner Brothers, just weaving fantasies, It's just too good to be true. Don't listen to those vice principals who tell you you better conform. You'd better figure out how things work and then, fit it. I always tell, every once in a while, students at our program at UCLA, for example, we frown on adaptations. We like students to write in classes original work. It's a film school. Invent your own characters. Invent your own stories. Don't model them on other people's work. And then also we lament the trend in Hollywood, especially among the studios. You don't see that. TV is wonderfully original, but in the studios, there's nothing original. Everything is a prequel or a sequel or a remake or a chapter in a franchise. Every once in a while, someone will say, "Well, I want to do an adaptation." All they're doing is adaptations in the theatrical films, the major studios. And if we don't do if I don't write an adaptation, how am I going to fit in? And I always say, we're not training writers to fit in. We're training writers to take over the business, to do what my classmates did from years ago, from decades ago. And that is to turn the business upside down and inside out and remake it, redo it day after day after day. The heck with what was. Don't look back, look forward, and tell the best story that you can.
What guidelines or principles do you hold dear to yourself, and what do you like to share with others?
Creative work that I do and make good money. I don't worry about money, and that's a tremendous privilege in this society or any society. What's bad about my life? I'll tell you what it is. Everybody, because I have a little bit of celebrity now, there was a time that I was on a lot of. I've appeared on a tremendous number of talk shows. I've been on the Today Show 10 times, commenting on media issues. I've been on the O'Reilly Factor a dozen times. I love to stand up to Bill O'Reilly. I don't mind bragging. People see me, and many of them recognize me. At least it seems like that. And the downside, I don't mind that a bit, but the downside is people always want to tell me their idea. Richie, I got a great idea for a movie. Right. And the problem is that when you have a really great idea for a movie, if you have a really great idea for a movie, that's all you've got. A great idea for a movie. I mean, what remains after that? Everything. The characters have to be created. The dialogue has to be invented. The incidents and the anecdotes, the events, the stuff of the story has to be created. The biggest mistake now is people are paying too much attention to ideas. There's a very popular book out now on screenwriting. I'm sure you know of it. It's called Save the Cat. And Save the Cat, in it, the late Blake Snyder preaches that one thing writers should do is find out from other people, not from themselves, what they're dying to write, but what's hot now, what's a trend now. Stop people in the street, especially young people, and ask them, I have an idea to write on, I'm thinking about writing a screenplay about this and that and the other thing. Would you be interested in that? And so on, and see if they'd be interested in something like that. I guess it sounds reasonable from a certain standpoint, but I want you to imagine that you're walking down the street and a person comes up to you and says, "Hey, excuse me, can I talk to you for a minute? I'm a screenwriter, and I have an idea for a series for cable, and it's a story about and let's say you're so generous that you say to the guy, well, sure, okay, tell it to me." And the guy says, well, it's about a high school chemistry teacher, and he gets a cancer diagnosis, and so he decides to go in the methamphetamine business, in league with a former incorrigible criminal student of his, and they manufacture and distribute methamphetamine. How does that sound? I mean, there's not a worse idea on the planet than that. Who would imagine that would go 62 hours of minute-by-minute, hour-by-hour genius, unparalleled insight into the nature of the human condition, also very socially conscious. If you look at, without preaching, Breaking Bad manages to make some really, really important and provocative and controversial comments regarding American society. For example, why does in this nation should a chemistry teacher in a city like Albuquerque, New Mexico, get $43,000 a year and have to supplement his income working at a car wash? They never hit you over the head with all of that. But that's a fact of American life. Why chemistry teachers are doing much better in China and in India, if you understand what I'm saying. What if a writer came up to you and said, "Hey, excuse me, I'm a writer. I have an idea for a movie, a theatrical feature, and I'd like to run it past you." And you say, "Well, okay." And he says, "It's a man who stutters. He has to give a speech. So he hires a speech therapist, and they work on the speech, and then he gives the speech." I mean, that is the dumbest idea that I ever heard. And yet, as The King's Speech, it was a brilliant film. It deservedly, in my view, won the Oscar for Best Screenplay. Oscar for Best Movie. So it's not about ideas. What's holding people back, I think, in many, many instances, is too much attention, too much credit assigned to the value of ideas. It's not about ideas, it's about stories. All of the value is in story. And I like to think also that story, a really, really well-told story, is actually a model of an idealized, romanticized human life. A short beginning, that's childhood, and then the big part of the movie, that's the middle. And ideally, the shortest part of all is the end. Who wants at the end of his or her life to be on resuscitators and IVs and all kinds of fancy medical equipment? You know, the romanticized, idealized end of life is quick. She passed away in her sleep, didn't feel a thing, didn't know a thing. So every successful dramatic narrative is really a model of a human life. Whose life? Well, who else's life other than the artist who created that narrative? So every work of art is really a portrait of the artist that created it. And let it unfold spontaneously and naturally. When you look back at it after you do that, some of it's going to work very well. Much of it will not, and you'll have to get rid of that and refine it. I was just talking to a former student of mine who's a hugely successful writer now for many years, David Koepp, K-O-E-P-P. He's so successful now that people even pronounce his name correctly. Call him David Koepp. David wrote two of the Jurassic Park pictures. He wrote Spider-Man, on and on and on. He's a major writer, and he has also directed some wonderful films. David says the key to his success is the number 17. 17. And what is 17? It's the number of drafts you have to write to get the movie right. Sometimes you end up, more often than not, you end up right where you started. But you needed to go through that journey to see that was where you needed to be. So it's really not about ideas. It's about story. It's about hard work. It's about putting in the time and seeing to it that every single sight and sound. First of all, you have to understand that a screenplay is just an elaborate list of two and only two kinds of information: what is seen and what is heard. If writers understand that you can't put anything in a script that isn't that, sight or sound. In other words, I don't want to see the word realize or think or feel. Janet feels guilty that she did this or that. Well, what, tell me what I'm seeing on the screen. If you limit it to that, and if you will see to it that each and every sight and every sound that you do report in the script palpably, measurably, observably moves that story forward in some way that you can describe, it doesn't matter what the script is about. It doesn't matter what the so-called genre is. You will engage people. You will draw people into it. You will succeed. That's the trick. That's what we preach at UCLA.
A writer should stay within only one genre. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would say, if somebody said, do I agree with that, I would say without any ambiguity, without any ambivalence at all, I would say yes and no. I believe genres are a hoax.
Okay.
I think there are just two genres, good movies and bad movies.
Oh, that's wonderful.
A good movie is one that engages you, that provokes you, that keeps your attention. It doesn't have to make you feel good. It just has to make you feel. And a bad movie is one that is boring, that just kind of lies there and you don't pay terribly much attention to it. Really great films, a lot of Hitchcock's films, certainly Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove is a good example. They mix genres. Now, what you're really asking, what most people be hearing is let's say you're a good action-adventure writer. And again, I don't think action-adventure is a separate genre. It can be well done or it can be lousy. But let's say that's what you are and you've established a reputation in that. I would say move away from that immediately. Show your chops elsewhere. Don't get typed into one kind of thing or another. The industry does that. Don't do that to yourself. Let everybody else betray you. Look at my sister, Jessica Walter, the acclaimed actress that you referred to. 40 years ago, she was in a splendid movie. It was the first movie that Clint Eastwood ever directed. It's called Play Misty for Me, and it's a brilliant movie. It holds up very, very well. And she played a dark femme fatale murderess.
It's Madame Butterfly time. First, friendly neighborhood geisha. Remove honorable shoes.
Stop it. Now, we've got to talk.
Have I done something wrong?
I'm just trying to be straight with you, that's all.
Be nice to me instead.
Jesus Christ.
I don't understand. Are you trying to say you don't love me anymore?
I never told you that I loved you.
Well, not in words, maybe, but there are lots of ways of saying things that have nothing to do with words.
It's funny you read it that way.
It's that other bitch, isn't it?
What are you talking about?
The picture in the silver frame in your dresser.
Look, that picture's got nothing to do with you.
What does have to do with me?
I never lied to you.
Big deal. He never lied to me. Well, what do you want for that? The Congressional Medal of Honor?
So,
What am I supposed to do? Sit here all dressed up in my little horse suit waiting for my lord and master to call?
nobody asked you to wait for it.
You're not dumping me, Buster Blue Eyes.
Get off my back, Evelyn.
Get off your back. That's where you've been keeping me, isn't it? You're nothing. You're not even good in bed. I just felt sorry for you, that's all. Bastard! You poor, pathetic bastard!
But when she was approached to do Arrested Development, she had an opportunity to show off of her comedy chops. And wow, she's become, one of the great comedy artists in American entertainment. God bless her. But you understand how genre limits everybody in that regard. I really believe old people can write young can write old, black can write white, and white can write black, gay can write straight can write gay. And one company called me up the other day, and they said they had a project. They were looking for a woman writer. They thought it would be the kind of story that would be uniquely suited to a woman writer. So I asked them, by the way, I am a huge defender of and promoter of diversity. I travel around the world and advise international film development corporations on how they can get their films internationally distributed. American films made outside the United States, only 1 in 10 is shown outside the country of its origin, but all American films are shown outside the country of their origin. So these people are looking for a particular script that would be, and they think that it ought to be written by a woman. It's the kind of script that would be right for a woman to write. So I asked them, please tell me what kinds of scripts you think would not be right for a woman to write. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Somebody calls me up and says, we think that, do you know a black writer? This is kind of an urban-based sort of a thing that would be suited to a black writer. Well, what kind of script should a black writer not write? The truth is anybody can write anything, and people should not be limited by their natures, but expanded by it. I go to a lot of writers' conferences, and I was at one recently where agents whom I know were complaining to me. They were saying, Richie, writers here at this conference, they're asking us, what should we write? What's hot now? What are you looking for now? I mean, if you have to ask somebody else what to write about, you're doomed before you even get started. If the writer doesn't care passionately about what she's writing about, why would any audience?
This is True North Story, the original podcast series. And now, back to the program.
To fit into the trends is a recipe for failure and frustration and disappointment. There aren't any trends. I'm right in the middle of it, and I can't tell you what the trend is. You have enough things going against you, enough forces opposing you. If you're trying to sell your daydreams, don't you be a force opposing yourself. At least you be a warrior for your own writing. And a way to do that is to avoid genre, to avoid trends, to avoid doing anything other than just following your heart. My old classmate, George Lucas, after American Graffiti, which was a huge, huge success. After that, what does George do? He does the stupidest thing you could do. He goes to science fiction again. He'd already failed with a science fiction movie, THX. There are only 11 people on the planet that ever saw THX. I guess George can take it, it's pretty lame, I think. It looks exactly like what it is, which is a brilliant, timeless 15-minute film, which was the student film version that he made at SC.
How did you get here?
I was lost.
You're not lost now. Know the way out?
That's the way out.
Well, that's the way we just came.
Yeah, but maybe you were traveling around in circles, because that's the way out.
How do you know?
Well, look. Look more closely, you see? Come on.
Oh, yeah.
So nobody knows what's hot, what's right. Writers have to find, it's such a cliche, but cliches get to be cliches because they're so dreadfully, wretchedly true. A writer's only chance is to follow her heart, to write what she thinks is really essential to her, and to try to communicate the passion that she feels about that to her audience. To try to figure it out in advance is to get intellectual. Intellect has a very critically important part in our lives, but art is not that part. It's not that place. Art is the place to go hog wild and buck naked and crazy as a loon, and reach and stretch and take risks and embrace those aspects of our nature that in the real world would kill us, would be fatal. Experience the fear, the darkness, the despair, in a safe place, which is a movie theater. You can think of the theater as a kind of a gymnasium for the senses, where you try out in a safe place those aspects of our nature that, as I say, are actually really rather lethal. So it's not just a diversion or a digression. It's really a very essential part of our emotional and social and cultural diet. And if we don't get our movies, if we don't get our passions, our creative excitement, we will, the nourishment that provides, we will become distended and warped in our culture and in our psychology and in our emotions in the same way that we get warped and distended bones and muscles if we are denied protein and proper nourishment. It's not just a metaphor. It really is the hands-on flesh and blood truth.
What would you be most famously quoted for saying?
Nobody wants to see the village of the happy, nice people. I like to, when I was mentioning earlier that I was on, I've been on I appear on many television, radio, talk shows. I am printed, I'm in the print media a lot. I had a letter, one of their columnists had commented darkly about the Steve Jobs movie, that he'd known Jobs, and that's not really an accurate portrayal of Jobs, the way he was and what his life was like. And my letter to the Times opened with, when I crave a tuna sandwich, I don't go to the hardware store. If I'm seeking a faithful, accurate recounting, of a person's life, I'm not going to the movie theater. Film is fake. What is real about film is, movies don't even move. Everybody knows that. Even when you get away from old analog film medium, when you're into digital, it's still frames. They're scanned instead of pulled down, the old mechanical mechanism. But it's still individual pictures that do not move. There's merely the appearance of motion. So film is fake. But there's something in terms of what you see and what you hear. But there's something that is completely real, totally real about film, and that is the feeling, the emotion that people experience. When you're afraid in a movie, you're really afraid in that movie. When you laugh at a comedy, it's really funny. It's not a facsimile of funny because it's a facsimile of life on the screen. It's really, really funny. When you are sad because of a movie that's sad, that grief, that sorrow, it's not fake. The situation is fake, but the feeling is completely real. And likewise, screenwriters, if you want people to really, really be moved by your film, by your television program, you don't have to make them feel good. Upset them, cause them despair, provoke them, outrage them, make them angry, break their hearts. They will line up to to buy tickets to your movie, or they'll tune to your show and make the ratings soar for it. That's all people want. They just want to feel things intensely. Our lives, for the most part, are pretty boring, and thank God for that. And you want a boring life. You want a life that is devoid of crises and turmoil and so on. In your art, though, that's what you want. You want the crisis, the turmoil. You want breathlessness. You want panic. You want fear. You want the safe place to experience all of that. You need to exercise that the same reason that you need to exercise your muscles at the gymnasium.
Richard, I just cannot thank you enough for your generosity and time. If somebody wanted to know more about you or any events you have coming up, how would they find you?
You can go to my website, which is richardwalter.com. There's no S at the end of my name. richardwalter.com is probably the easiest way to go. If you want to contact me directly, you can feel free. Rather than give out my email address, which people might have trouble copying down, you just Google UCLA. The main page will come up, and there's a directory there. And if you click on there, all of my stats will come up, including my email. And anybody who emails me, I make it a point to respond. Very happy to do that. I don't consider it a burden, but a blessing that people who have not just the discipline and the talent to be creative, but the courage that it takes to put it on the page. Got to be brave if you want to live a life in art. I consider that a blessing that I cross paths with people like that. So the more the merrier. A newsletter that goes out every month. It's free, an email screenwriting newsletter that I'm happy to put anybody on the list who approaches me and wants to be on that list. And then I also have from time to time events coming up. For example, in the summertime at UCLA, I teach a regular for credit UCLA screenwriting course where you get very individual attention on campus, and it's open to both to UCLA students but also to non-UCLA students. Otherwise, most everything I teach is limited to people actually enrolled and registered, matriculated at UCLA, and even then you have to be in the film major. But summers, from late June for 6 weeks until the end of July, I do offer a advanced screenwriting seminar that's appropriate for experienced writers and also for writers with less experience. And you can find out about all of that, including my online courses where you don't need to be in LA at all. Anywhere you have a laptop and a internet connection, you can join us. You can find out all about that by going to my website or email me directly, and I'll answer any questions that you have.
Thank you for listening to True North Story, the series. Follow us on Twitter @True North Story, and tune in next time for another True North Story.